So before you decide to make a career change or a move into the computer networking field, clearly it makes sense to understand what is a computer network. Get some sort of a visualization in your mind about what this thing is that you're going to be jumping into. So for those of you who are really unfamiliar with this term, let me try to paint some broad strokes here as far as what a computer network is. Okay, so let's start out in the old days like being, 40 plus years ago, when people would have their PCs, their laptops, and everything was self-contained. In other words, there was no network. Everything you needed to do, your spreadsheets, your word processing, your calendaring was all right there on your local PC or laptop. And if you wanted to exchange data with someone else's PC or laptop, you had to use what was called the sneaker net. I don't know if you guys have ever heard that term before, but the sneaker net basically meant you took a floppy disk and copied the stuff from your laptop or PC onto this disk that you could hold in your hands, and wearing your sneakers, walked across the room to somebody else's PC and handed it to them so they could slip it into their PC or desktop and copy your information. So there was no electronic network available to send data back and forth. So a network, a lot of times when people think of a network, they think of these really complex things, but technically speaking, a network is really nothing more than two or more computing devices connected together by a cable or via some wireless connection in such a way that they can exchange data. That is a network. So it can be really small as something that's just a cable and two interface cards connecting that cable, and that's it. Now, of course, in most networks today, it's much larger than that. But a network is just a conglomeration of hardware like cables, cards that slip into the back of your laptop, like routers and switches, and software to facilitate this exchange of information between a tablet and a server, or between two PCs, or between a smartphone and a server. The network just facilitates all that. So if we want these guys to be able to talk to each other without using the sneaker net, we need to implement some cabling in here and some network hardware, what we call the network infrastructure. So the network infrastructure is the term we use for the network. It's everything you can see, right? It's the physical boxes, cables, and everything that makes up the network. So we use the term network infrastructure for that. Also, back in those days, people had telephones on their desk or in their cube. And back in the old days, those telephones had their own separate private network. Okay, so those telephones would have cables that would run back to a big box called a PBX. It was called a private branch exchange. And then that PBX would then have cables that connected to the telephone company. So there really was no data network. There was just this telephone network just for voice calls. And then they invented the internet protocol. They invented all these things that put networks together. And, a couple of decades ago, they said, hey, we have networks that are carrying data. People are doing their web browsing on the network. They're now looking at their internet calendars on the network. Why don't we move the phones onto the network as well? Why don't we have the same wires carrying both the user traffic, like their web browsing, like their calendaring, their email, as well as the telephony traffic, the voice traffic. So now the IP phones had to be connected to the network as well. So in order to create the network, we need some sort of network infrastructure. So like in this particular case, all these dashed lines represent cables, physical cables, connecting to the laptops, the PCs, and to the IP phones. And then to connect them all together, these cables sort of terminate in one central device. In this particular case, this icon is a switch. So this is a basic network here. Our network infrastructure is very simple. It's just composed of one physical box called a networking switch with lots of cables coming out of that box, connecting everybody's laptop, everybody's PC, everybody's IP phone. And so this is what gives all these devices the ability to exchange information back and forth. Now, of course, in today's network, we also have Wi-Fi, right, which is wireless networking using radios. And for the Wi-Fi users, their network interface card does not physically connect to a cable. Their network interface card uses radio waves, or the same types of radio waves that you listen to the radio on when you listen to a radio station. Wi-Fi is, radio frequencies. And those radio frequencies are picked up by the network infrastructure. So there's other components of the network infrastructure that deal with Wi-Fi. Like in this particular case, these things that we see right here, these are what we call access points. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But an access point is a thing that's listening to your laptop, listening to your smartphone or your tablet, that's able to pick up your wireless signals. And then on the back end, it is connected to the network infrastructure. So it's connected to a switch. And clearly, if we want these devices on the Wi-Fi to be able to talk to the wired devices, well, that part of the network has to be connected to the network infrastructure. So there's a real simple network. Now, if we're getting bigger than this, if we're talking about a corporate network, like in some large company, chances are they want to consolidate all of their information, all of their own web servers. There's servers that store everybody's emails. There's servers that store all the corporate documents and payroll documents and stuff. They're going to store those in what's called a data center. So a data center is a very highly secured room that has tons and tons of servers in it. Now you might be wondering, well, what's a server? Maybe you've never heard that term server before. A server is basically just a computer, like the computer you have at home, but the difference is it's a much higher powered computer. It's got a lot more memory, so it can store tons and tons and tons of information. It can store much more information than your laptop or your tablet can. Also, the processor of the server, the brain, the intelligence of the server is usually much faster, much bigger than what you would find in a laptop or a PC. So it can do computing much more quickly than a host device like a laptop. So we would buy a bunch of servers. That's where we would have our web pages, our email services, our file services, and all those services would be in a room, a locked room called a data center. And then clearly that data center also needs to be connected back to the network infrastructure so we can pull data from it and so we can push data to it. And of course, you could stop there, but most networks also have a connection to the internet. So part of your network infrastructure will be the cabling and the devices necessary to connect to the internet. So let's talk about some basic network vocabulary here. Some common vocabulary you'll need to know. So LANs versus WANs. A LAN stands for a local area network. So versus a WAN is a wide area network. So a local area network is what you're on right now. So however you're connecting to the network, whether you're connecting via Wi-Fi or whether you actually have a cable connecting out of your PC or your laptop, that network that you're physically connected to right now is considered a local area network. It's local to you. As the user, it's what you connect to give you network access. Now, a local area network could be really small. For example, if you're watching this video from home, your local area network could be something as small as the network interface card on your laptop, the cable that's plugged into it, and that cable might be terminating on a cable modem or a DSL modem. And that's it. Just those three components, the cable modem, the cable itself, and the network interface card comprise your LAN, your local area network. Now, if you're working at a corporate headquarters, a LAN could be quite large. It could be an entire building with thousands of users in it and just miles of cabling and tons of network interface cards, but that's also called a local area network. So one thing that people usually think of when they think of a local area network, whether it's small or big, one thing that defines a local area network is that it's a network that some organization completely controls. For example, think of your home network. You're in charge of it. In your home network, you're in charge of the cable. You had to buy that cable. You had to plug that cable in. You're in charge of pulling out that cable. You're in charge of the network interface card in your laptop. If it breaks, you're going to have to figure out some way to replace it. You're in charge of the cable modem. And in a much larger local area network, like in a company, there's an IT department, an information technology department, and they are in charge of the LAN. They're in charge of all those hundreds of cables and those routers and those switches and everything in between. They bought that stuff, they implemented it, they monitor it, and they configure it. So a LAN is owned and maintained by someone. Whereas a wide area network, if I want to take my local area network that's here in North Carolina and the data that's running across it, I want to send that data to another local area network that's in Seattle, Washington. Well, even if I had billions of dollars at my disposal, chances are I probably would not get the government permits to be able to dig a 3,000-mile trench across the United States, lay all my own personal cable so I could connect those two lands together. I'm not going to be able to get the permits to do that. So luckily for me, there are what's called service providers like Time Warner Cable, Comcast, Sprint. These are existing companies that have already laid the cable for miles and miles and miles across the entire country, and I can utilize their services. So what I'm utilizing in that case is called a wide area network. So wide area network is typically owned and operated by some other company. You pay them a fee to use their network. Also, typically speaking, that wide area network that you are accessing, it's not all yours. If you envision the actual cables are laid underneath the ground or running through the lakes or going across telephone poles, those cables are not just carrying your data. They're also carrying data from your neighbors and from other cities. So it's a shared network. It's owned, operated, and maintained by some other company, a service provider that you pay for, and it covers vast distances. The purpose of a WAN is to be able to connect LANs together when those LANs are too far apart for you to actually cable them directly yourself. A node or host. So let's talk a little bit about those. So any device that connects to a network where data can be stored on that device is what we would consider a node or a host. For example, everything I've been talking about, your laptop, your smartphone, your PC, your tablet, the servers that you're connecting to, those are all called nodes or hosts. Now there is sort of a difference between a node and a host. A host is what I've just been describing. All right, a host is something that has data on it that can push that data to someone else or retrieve data from someone else. So that's a host. A node is technically anything that connects to a network. So it's not just the end devices like the laptop, the PC, the smartphone. It's also the network infrastructure itself, like the boxes that you connect to. A switch is considered a network node. A router, a firewall. These are all nodes. These are all devices that are connected together with cables. They're all considered nodes. But you wouldn't call a router or a switch or a firewall a host. A host is typically the thing at the end of the network where the data is originating from or going to. That's a host. So like in this particular case right here, these are all examples of hosts, right? We've got a laptop connected to a server, and we might have a smartphone as well. So these are all nodes. These are also all hosts. Also, what's the difference between local versus remote resources? Well, if you have your laptop as an example, and you have no network connection at all, no Wi-Fi, no cable, nothing, anything that you can do on your laptop, you are making use of your own local resources. Clearly, you can pick up that laptop and move to the next room, move to the next county, move to the next country, and you're taking your local resources with you. They're all built into your laptop. They're all built into your smartphone, your tablet. So local resources are stuff that you can use that don't require a network connection. And just the opposite is true of remote resources. Remote resources are designed to be accessed by a network. You can't get to them without a network. So for example, when you bring up a website like google.com or ine.com, you are tapping into, you're accessing what's called a remote resource. There's some server who's sitting a few hundred or maybe a few thousand miles away from you. You're sending a message to that server, that remote resource, saying, give me your data. In this particular case, you're saying, give me a website. And then it's sending that data down to you. So a network is designed to be able to give you access to remote resources. Now, a remote resource could also be just 5 feet away from you. If I have a network printer that I have to access via Wi-Fi, that's considered a remote resource because it's not physically connected to me. If I don't have some kind of a network connection, I can't get to that printer, even though it's only 5 feet away. So the word remote doesn't really imply distance. It just implies that we have to use a network to get to that device. And then I'm sure that everybody who's watching knows what the internet is. Now, a lot of people, when they think of the internet, what they might envision in their head is, okay, the internet is when I bring up Google Chrome or when I bring up Internet Explorer and I go to web pages, you know, like personalizationmall.com or google.com or cnn.com. I'm accessing the internet. But what is the internet really? The internet is just millions and millions and millions of local area networks. They're all tied in together. So when you access ine.com, your local network in your house is sending a request to INE's local network. And on INE's network, there's a box, there's a server that has that website in it. It's a remote resource. So you're accessing that server and you're saying, give me your data. And then you're getting information back. When you access any website, anything on the internet is basically a box. It's a server that has information stored on it. And all these local area networks are tied together via a webbed infrastructure of a network. That's why the internet used to be called the World Wide Web, because it's like a spider web of all these things interconnected together via the internet. So the internet is just a massive collection of networks. They're all publicly accessible. That's the internet. So why do we need computer networks? Well, number one, the main reason is networks allow us to share things. Like I said, back in the days of SneakerNet, you had a network composed of your tennis shoes and your feet to get data from one PC to another. So networks allow us to share things electronically. So we can sit in our chairs, never get up, eat our junk food, and share data back and forth with other users. So we can share files, as an example. What are some of the things we can share? You know, you can retrieve a Word document or a spreadsheet that's stored remotely on somebody else's computer or somebody else's server, right? That's not stored locally on your own device. You can use it to share programs. Sometimes on a network, you will access the network and you will run a program, you will run an application that's not actually on your laptop itself. That's what we call a remote or an internet or a network-based program. So you don't have to install it. There's no floppy disk to install. There's no USB card to install. There's no memory you got to be concerned about. The program is completely running on some other device. You tap into that device over the network, you run the program, and then you're done. So without the network, you wouldn't have that ability. And also networks allow us to share resources. For example, a network printer is an example of a resource that is commonly shared among multiple people. So everybody in the office doesn't have to have their own local printer connected directly to their laptop or PC. A network-based scanner, those are all examples of resources that you could only use if you had a network to connect it to. So that's sort of the introduction to what a computer network is. In the next video, I'm going to talk about what are some of the common components that you would find on a computer network.